Hi, Dean. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. So what you'll be able to do, I've got you as a co-host, so you'll be able to share your screen. When you do share your screen, at the top, there is an option to like lock your whiteboard just so nobody else writes on your screen. We saw that in another one. So just when you go to share
Okay.
screen with your presentation,
Okay.
you're going to want to just make sure that it's not you know, I don't think anyone will write on it, but you never know what happens. I know people are using all kinds of different technologies and stuff like that. So I can let you get all set up
Sure.
and do what you got to do. And then you've got co-host permissions. So you're good to share your screen. The session will be recorded. I'll let people in and take attendance. So don't worry about that. And we'll have some
Okay.
other moderators on as well to, you do what you got to do.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay. And Dean, just let me know when you're ready and I can start letting people in. They're early, so we still have about 7 minutes till the next session, but whatever works for you, we can let them in and whenever you're ready.
There's nothing I need to do between now and then, so you're okay to let, as far as I'm concerned, anybody can come in, and then I'm
Okay.
just I'm to start on time, or is somebody going to introduce me, or?
Yeah, I can just jump in and introduce you
Okay.
quickly, just, to let people know to mute themselves, kind of the general Zoom protocols, but
Perfect.
and then I won't jump in unless you need something, you can flag me, but I'm just watching in the background. So I'll start admitting people and then we're good to go.
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay. Start video. Okay. Okay. Oh, there we go. So you're on. Okay.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer. I am just running things behind the scenes. I wanted to, it's 12 o'clock, so I'd love to get the session going so that we can stay as much on schedule as possible. When you come into the chat, you will be muted, but you do have the ability to unmute yourself. So we just ask that while the session is running, unless you have a question, that you try to keep yourself unmuted for any unknown distractions, dogs barking, phones ringing, that type of stuff. You can put up your hand. There is a little at the bottom of your screen, there is a reaction option, and you can put up your hand if there's questions. But other than that, I will leave it to Dean to take you through the session. And again, all sessions are being recorded. So if there's any issues, you will be able to access the link following it and view it that way as well.
So apparently all of my reactions will be recorded and put on the permanent record so everybody can have a laugh and giggle at it later. So that's much appreciated. I have some cheers there. So many familiar faces and beautiful people I'm seeing here today. As Jennifer pointed out, there is a hand raising button. There's options to interact. I'm going to be using a PowerPoint presentation, and most of my focus is going to be there, so I don't know how much I'll be able to answer questions while it's happening because I'm not going to be able to really see so much of the reactions of the people, but if I do, I'll definitely do that, but we'll save some room at the end for question and answer. I think we're going to probably draw some questions from the topics that I've decided to talk about. How many answers I have are a different story. Because this is designed to actually give you more questions when we're looking at moving into the future of addiction and what it means for us. So I'm going to start right away with my presentation. I firstly thank everybody for your participation and being here and the large group of people and the support I received prior to this. I received some private messages and some kudos and pats on the back from people in the community, and that goes a long way and it feels wonderful and I appreciate that. So I'm going to start with sharing my presentation. Let's see here. And I think we have it.
Is everything okay, Dean? Or you're...
Yeah, I was looking for that. You asked me to turn off the whiteboard and I'm not seeing an option to turn off the whiteboard.
Up at the top near your screen share where it says you're sharing your screen, there should be a drop down option, and it's usually in there. Like there's a drop down, and just so that yeah, under the view options, I think that way people won't write inappropriate messages on your screen.
Yeah, I hate it when that happens. I see Mike Hannon is here, so we're not going to let it past him. We're gonna not allow that. Okay. Hopefully that doesn't happen. I'm not sure if I've got that set up or not, but we're gonna move ahead with the presentation. So, hello everyone. I'm Dean Anderson. I'm an addiction counselor, CACC certified. I spent the last chunk of my career working in withdrawal management, working with the homeless population at the Salvation Army Center of Hope. Prior to that, some experience and lived experience and working in residential care. I'm a private practice counselor. I work with some members' assistance plans through various unions and do work for them along with my own client load. I am, I was very hesitant to put this on here, but I'm the host of a television show called Invisible, Breaking Through the Stigma of Addiction. It is, we get some thumbs up here. It is something that I'm shying away from, but at the same time, if I want to break through the stigma of addiction, I have to talk about it, I have to share it. But some of you may know that some of the beautiful people that have participated in said show are actually in the panel today and in today's Zoom. Not only that, some of them are sharing throughout the weekend. So the link to the show is available within my bio in Wova. So you go Wova. I don't know. I'm going with that. But in there, you can click on it and you can get the Wova, get the Wova, get the Shova. And you can see some of these amazing people on there. I am also a background track instructor for CMHA and the provincial government. I'm a member of the Mental Health and Addiction Advisory Panel for the London Police and Services Board, in addition to some other things that I do within the community to try and participate. And in the past, I also participated a lot in other panels, tables, all those wonderful things. The sweater vest, my mom told me I had to do the sweater vest. She said that's how Dean looks smart. So if you want to be taken seriously, you have to have the sweater vest. So that's that. So what we're going to be doing today is working myself out of a job. And I know this actually got some attention because some people messaged me saying, what does that even mean, right? I mean, who wants to do that? And the answer is nobody wants to do that. But I'm going to, ooh, look at the fancy animations I got going here. With that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share for some of the people, I know that there's some people that really know their stuff in here, and maybe there's some that are a little new or whatever. So anecdotally, I'm going to talk a little bit of an analogy and a little bit elementary, but at the beginning, but it all leads somewhere. I'm telling a story so that we can set the stage for sharing more information. So right off the bat, we have looking at an analogy of addiction. Somebody is floating down a river. We see them and they seem to be in trouble. We assume that they're in trouble. And we see that they're in danger. We all know that the first thing we're going to do is we're going to bend over backwards. We're going to go out of our way and do what we can to try and help that person in the river. And we're going to reach out and try and find the help that they need. And we're going to try and find the best professionals in that. In this analogy, we're looking at the early years of our knowledge of substance use and addiction. And sometimes those weren't always the best helpers. They were just the people that were there to help protect us. Then it became a point where there were too many to save, and we didn't know, what direction we're going. And I would like to note that the people that needed saving were not all Caucasian ballerinas. That just happened to be the stickers that I could use from the graphic design store. But in this scenario, we start to recognize really quickly that there's a bigger problem and there's much more to be done and more lives to be saved and work that needs to be taken care of. So we continuously bring in more people and more healthcare providers, and we try to figure out what's next. Even to the point of, you can see this wonderful doctor is kind of ignoring the problem altogether. Not that doctors do that, but we can see that there's also a part of that says, we look past the problem, or we ignore that it's there. So down on the bottom, I have a quote from Desmond Tutu: there comes a point when we need to stop pulling people out of the river, not that we would ever want to do that, when we need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in the first place. So when we do go upstream, we want to ask the people, why they're going in and what's making them go in. And once upon a time, the answer was they just weren't intelligent. They were just immoral. They were, people that were jumping in the river didn't know any better. But when asked, we can look at that and say, and talk to these people, and it would be like, it's hot outside. I need relief. I'm looking for fun. I'm looking for excitement. I'm looking for peace. I'm looking for exercise. I mean, all the list of things that would cause them to go in the river, but we don't look at it in that way in that time. So we decide that the best thing to do is to protect these people. So the best way to protect people is shame them, right? Don't do it. You're a bad person. You're a piece of garbage if you go in there. Like, why would you do that? That normally just causes more people to want to go in the river and see how fun it is and see how much it's going against the system and how we're going to dive into this water. So the answer after that is like, well, let's just make it illegal, right? Illicit drugs, prohibition, all those wonderful things happen. And it never did anything. It just made people figure out alternative ways to be able to jump in the river, to get a helicopter ride, dig a tunnel, I don't know, start a tube ride, whatever it is that you got to do to get this to happen. So, so once looking at that, we go, it's still even then to throw the people in jail, they'll still figure out a way to get out of jail, get in the river. They'll still figure it out. People are very creative. So we say, well, let's make it completely illegal, right? Well, mostly illegal, right? We might as well make some money while we're at it to support this fancy booth, right? So that we can pay for the things that we need to pay for and to make some money off of this process. Not only that, but the fancy booth and more, the more being additional services and paying for the police and paying for the monitoring of the river itself and figuring out how we're going to pay for the firefighters, pay for the emergency services. And then lastly, in this cycle of the river, we try to say, how are we going to solve this problem? How are we going to fix it? How are we going to save these lives? And we look at it as, as a problem and very reactive. And we say, well, we have to figure out how to stop these people from jumping in the river. We have to figure out how to get them out of the river and make them not want to go back in again. We've got to throw them some floaties and make sure they don't drown. We have to do all these things to try and figure out how to protect people in this river system and to keep them safe. So we're gonna cure them. We're gonna educate them. We're gonna teach them how to swim, right? Or figure out how to keep them away from the river altogether. And then this is where we take a little minute and we give everybody here a little round of applause and a clap for being those helpers and the heroes and the wonderful people that are participating in this system of trying to make the world a better place and trying to save all these people from falling in said river system or being swept away, and if not dying from this process, which is horrible. So like I said, I'm setting the stage for something, and I want to look at something real quickly. And once we look at this whole river system and we look at how we provide a service, and there has to be a way to provide this service, we look at who's on the payroll. I mean, who's being paid to take care of these systems. And we have, of course, the police, so substance use is a big call for them. EMS, in the city of London, working at the Salvation Army, the #1 call in the city of London was police and EMS for emergency services to the Salvation Army Center of Hope. Most of that was mental health and addiction calls, almost all of it. Medical nurses and doctors. In the city of, I'm gonna refer a lot to the city of London because these are the numbers I know and these are the things that I've participated in. But I'm assuming that most of these transfer over quite well into other areas. But in the city of London, medical nurses and doctors, the #1 employer in the city of London is London Health Science Center. It's the most jobs. I saw a stat a couple of years ago. I couldn't find it again, but it was 56% of the intakes at London Health Sciences Center were substance use related. So that just goes to show you the #1 employer, and then the #1 intake is substance use. Fire and rescue, of course, we know that's first responders. That's a high call. Harm reduction workers, social workers, counselors and therapists, such as most of you are here today, know the role and what's involved in this. We have parole and corrections through the provincial government. We have legal and court services for those people who have gotten themselves into trouble or gotten caught swimming in the river, so to speak, mental health workers, peers and coaches, leadership and finance, the people that run the buildings and the organizations and the people that run the treatment centers and the management. We have government and advisory programs and colleges that have to support all of these people listed above. We have post-secondary education and training, which I see a couple of people in the audience today that fall into that category, that train all of the people that are listed above. We have secondary services. So if we look at all of those things above, and just the one thing all by itself in the City of London, the #1 employer being London Health Science Centre, if you go near London Health Science Centre, there's gas stations and restaurants and grocery stores and taxi cabs and all the infrastructure that goes along with that. That's all provided by jobs, with 56% of those intakes being substance use related. That says a lot. So there's a lot of money going in there. Right on the very bottom, we have disoriented postal workers. That's because I think there's a postal worker on my image here, and he's kind of facing backwards compared to everybody else. I don't know what he's doing there, but I figured he needed to be included. So I've included the disoriented postal worker. We're not biased, we're all inclusive here, so we're going to make sure that we include everyone and not leave anybody out of the program. So I would encourage everybody, if you do have a pen or you'd like to just make a mental note in your head, I would encourage you to just kind of follow along on this process. And I know we have people from all across Canada today. So the financial cost to the taxpayer, this is, 2018, this is an actual source from the Canadian government looking at the cost per capita annually for taxpayers with substance use and addiction. And if you look at it here, I'm going to go, like I said, I'm going to use London for everything. So in London, we have, cost per capita is $1,074 per person per year is what the cost of substance use and addiction is. And if we flip over to the next page, I have calculated it here to look at the financial impacts of London, Ontario, with a population of 511,000 people. It's approximate cost of $584 million of taxpayers' dollars that go in influx to substance use. So the questions I have, and the reason why I want you to have a pen is because I want you to look at what your capita was if you didn't look at it previously. Did everybody get that, what their province was? Doesn't matter. If you want to have a look there, you can see it. So, I mean, to look at what yours is and then look at what your, what your population of your town or city is, and to see, what kind of money that is. The question I have is looking at this from the idea of when we look at what I just said, when we talk about, just using London Health Sciences Centre here in London, being the #1 employer, that's a lot of tax dollars, that's a lot of jobs, that's a lot of money that goes towards employees buying cars and the taxes on those cars and putting gas in those cars and filling our economy with those dollars. And so I kind of asked the question, when we have the political parties, the thing at the top of the list on the political campaigns is it's normally saying we're creating jobs or we're doing something good for the economy. And it turns out this does both, right? So it creates jobs and influxes the economy with a lot. So my question is, and I don't expect an answer. I question sometimes when I work in this field, have we become codependent on this financing as a field, right? I mean, it's a hard question. People are going to look at me funny, but it's a legitimate question, I think, because we work in this field, and then the people that controls the money that's sending us is also the people. Someone's got their microphone off. If they could mute themselves, that'd be great. So we asked that question, and the reason why I put shh at the bottom was because there is the knowledge of this information actually can go against us in a bunch of horrible ways, and then people looking at this in the wrong light when we have those people that are so against taking care of people and looking at healthcare and looking at mental health and looking at addiction and seeing it as a burden on society. To get a hold of this number just usually drives a wedge between us and them even more. So when we keep following this train of thought through, we can see the population of 511,000. The City of London, again, we're using those numbers. the Stats Canada says 1 in 10. So the top number is 1 in 10 is currently actively in substance use and addiction. So for the city of London, it's 51,000 people. Stats Canada also says 22.3% of people will suffer from substance use disorder in their lifetime. I don't know how accurate these numbers are because I know that there's a lot of dishonesty, there's a lot of half stats, there's a lot of things that don't get reported. So I would like to think that this is much bigger. And then I believe this is a 2016 stat, 2018 stat. I believe that since COVID, we're probably seeing a pretty dramatic increase in this as well. So there's a good chance that these numbers are quite a bit higher. And when we look at it from the perspective of how many active programs we have, how many people are in these programs, and this is all going to come to light later. So I just want to draw attention to it, and I'll bring it up later. But keeping in mind that the most, if you've ever heard of the 80-20 rule, most of the time, 80% of our resources or 80% of our time goes into 20% of the clients or 20% of the people. And I think that that's just a generic number across the board. I don't think that applies in substance use. I think it's probably like 90-10, 90% of the resources goes into 10% of the, but I mean, that's just me throwing stuff anecdotally out there. But when you ask yourself in the City of London, to think of how many people are in active programs, out of these, 510,000, if the numbers are correct, 510,000 in active addiction, 113,000 in their lifetime, then to do simple math, and it's probably not very accurate, but to do simple math would be to subtract those two numbers, and you would have 60,000 people in recovery, right? I mean, essentially, kind of, right? So to say that there's 60,000 people in recovery, if we look at the largest recovery program in the City of London, its current members from Alcoholics Anonymous is 1,000 members. Okay, so I'm going to bring to light why this is important later. But if you're looking at 60,000 potentially in recovery and only 1,000 of them are in AA, it makes you ask the question, where's the other 59,000? And what are they doing, right? How are they getting served? I mean, and of course, AA that's the largest number. We still have, independent services. We still have, people going to counseling, people going to addiction services or CAMH or, residential care, post-care programs and all that stuff. But even if you quadrupled that number, I mean, you're still looking at 50,000 people kind of wandering around. So that's food for thought. So the question is, that I get all the time is, how do we fix that problem? How do we make it better? People, as an addiction, I'm sure every single one of you have been asked this by a friend or family member if you work in the field. How are we going to fix the problem? How are we going to change it? How are we going to make the world better, right? And my question always back to the person who asks, what do you think? Because I'm curious and I want to know what they think the problem is. Here are the things that normally come to me, right? People will say increased punishment. The people need to get scared straight. And all the faces, I see them all, right? People making the stinky faces, right? Because we know that's not true. We know it doesn't work. We know it's got no purpose. But these are some of the answers I hear from other people, the most common answers, right? People say we need more money, right? And that's always the answer. Throw some more money at it. We can already see how much we spend. We spend a lot, right? And there's a lot of money going in there to a small percentage of the population. More accessible services. Decriminalization. I mean, of course, it worked in Portugal. That's always the answer that people have. And when we look at, our structure and we look at what we have right now, when I ask that question, if we're dependent on the finances, I think that we kind of are. Portugal did this model because they couldn't afford what we're paying, right? They didn't have the taxpayers of the dollars. So they said, we have to find an alternative. So, I mean, they had to do that. Right now, we're kind of making money off the criminalization of it. We're kind of, doing okay by it. Not in a humane sense, but if you look at it from the amount of dollars. So I don't know what would happen if we decriminalized and how we would reroute those funds to something else. Another answer is more treatment centers, more peer support. Bridging the gaps is always a good answer because we know that we have siloed systems and we've got a lot of supports out there. There's just access to them is tampered or hampered, right? Better government. That's the best answer. That's always the answer. Yeah, we need just a better government. They'll fix all the problems. We got this, right? Of course, there's prevention and awareness, and then education and educating people. So there's one thing I would like you to notice really quick is that most of these, the majority of these are reactive. The majority of these are, fixing things, and we're looking at that, pulling people out of that river that they've fallen into. So, or then there's my answer, and this is what brings us here today in the topic of my conversation. My answer is, well, the answer is to work myself out of a job. And that's trying to figure out how to change the system and to change things as a whole so that, I don't need to have a job. I don't need to be that important. I don't need to have a big client load and figure my ways out. So I believe it's really important that we always visualize our goals and we visualize what that looks like. This is what it looks like when I work myself out of a job. Come on, laugh. It's funny. You have to picture what's going on. So the question is that I ask, this picture is me looking for my sweater vest. The question I ask is with your pen and paper is I'm going to go through and ask you some questions, and I'm going to talk about some things, and it would be wonderful if everybody could, just look along and answer yourself some of these questions and see what you think in regards to them. So working myself out of a job. So untangling the wires. So when we looked at that story at the beginning and we're looking at bringing in all these different services and how we're trying to fix a system, what happens is looking at this picture of wires, and we've all seen it, or had a house where the cable guy has come and he just ran a new wire instead of setting the old one up, and then they just run a wire off the top of wire, and every time a new person comes in, they run that new wire. This is the system that I saw when I was working through the Salvation Army and working within the public system in London, is people would come along and they would create systems, but then someone else would come along and create a new system or a better way. People would come along and put a new thing that they wanted to do, but they never looked at what was already in place. They just keep laying things on top of laying things on top of laying things, and then these wires all get crossed. So in my description here, it says years of everyone doing their best and what they believe to be true should never go unrecognized, because every one of these people had the best interests at heart. I believe that they want to make good, right? However, it comes a time when we need to clean the stockroom. And the story that I have is I worked in retail many years ago, and we had had a gentleman who ran the stockroom. And this was a Fortune 500 company, big box store, very chaotic, $1 million sales. And in this process, the guy running the stockroom was disorganized. He was messy. He had a bunch of different systems going. They're all crisscrossing. One day he decided he was going to quit and walk out. So then the store continued to run around and try to serve each individual customer as they came through the door. And what they would do is if they didn't have something on the shelf, they would go running into the stockroom. They would climb up 20-foot scaffolding. They'd dig through a skid. They'd rip paper. They'd grab the one bag out that this person wanted. They'd throw it down to somebody on the floor. They'd bring it out to the person. Customer's been standing in the store for 20 minutes holding their breath while this guy's climbing up in the steel to get it. And then we're doing this all day, all night. So then when I go into the store and see what's going on, they go, well, we have to keep the customers happy. We have to fix, this things that's happening in front of us. And I'm like, no, you need to stop doing all of this, and you need to go and focus and clean the stockroom. They're like, no, we don't have time. We have to go help these individuals and help these clients. And they, in the process of wandering around and tripping over themselves looking for stock and inventory, nobody got served, and the people that did get served weren't getting served properly, and they were getting upset, and they were losing customers, and things were going. So we took a day, and we cleaned up the stockroom a full day where we didn't do anything for anybody. Anybody came in looking for something, we said, sorry, we can't help you, right? We'll come back tomorrow. And what we did was we took a full day to clean the stockroom and stock the shelves. And then within a week, the sales went up 40% because the stockroom was cleaned and the product was on the floor. And it was really that simple. But it was because of that putting, we've got to fix what we've got to fix. And I'm not saying that we need to stop helping people. What I am saying, though, is there's a system that has been running, and it's important, but it feels like we're doing things like we've always done them. It says on the bottom here, right? We've always done it this way, and that's the fastest way. In running withdrawal management in London for several years, I'd ask all day, every day. I'd walk around and ask the question, why do we do that this way? And if the answer was, why do we do it this way? The answer is, we've always done it this way. we're looking at it. We're diving into it deep, and we're figuring out why, because that is not an answer, and it's never an answer. Because there's got to be a better way to do it. So the question that I have for you, as people that work in this field, is that an answer? Is that something that you say is that we've always done it this way is your answer to fixing a problem, right? And the question I want to ask yourself is, how can you start over? How can you clean your stockroom? What are things that you can do to get a fresh start and reorganize or take systems and make them run succinctly instead of, against each other? Stop fighting amongst ourselves. We've all seen this working in the field, and we know how important it can be. And I asked the question of, how are you being inclusive with others, with other disciplines and programs, and how are we, creating bridges and not silos? And I put over on the one side, I put for real, because what I've recognized is that there are lots of lip service, and there's lots of tables, and there's lots of committees, and there's lots of people sitting around talking about what they're doing to bridge these gaps, and it's a lot of lip service, right? And I know that there's people out there that are part of these tables and committees, and I know that you probably are doing good things or you have good intentions. My experience has shown that it's a lot of talking around a table, and then maybe small things get changed over periods of time. And the only time I ever saw real bridges being built was when it was individual treatment going to other individual treatments and saying, let's do something, let's make this work, let's actually hold each other accountable, and let's set a plan, and let's create something and make something happen, right? The withdrawal management program in London now lets addiction services at Thames Valley bring in a medical nurse and bring in, which was never thought of before, because of the idea that, this is somebody from another program, we probably shouldn't cross those bridges. Was it talked about before? Sorry, I'm lying. It was talked about before in tables for years. Right? And it wasn't until somebody walked into, it was me actually, I walked into addiction services and said, what can we do? How are we going to change this? How can we get our clients to go see you when they leave us, right? We're an abstinence-based program and you're harm reduction, but that doesn't mean a damn thing. People still need care. What are we doing, right? So I believe that we need to stop fighting amongst ourselves and start, we spend too much time fighting over that piece of pie, right? Because the pie seems so small, but I'm trying to show you that that's not the case. The pie is actually pretty big. Part of that previous slide of looking at how we can get those wires straight, those wires are costing money. Every single one of those programs that's running inefficiently is costing millions of dollars. Every time that we save one of those, or we cut a line or do something, that's more money for other programs. That's more money for other things, right? So this, goes back to that idea of asking yourself, am I working myself out of a job? How am I making this more efficient? And nobody wants to hear those answers because we're looking at our own security and our own safety. So when we're talking about that, we're looking at the dependency on funding. We all want to get paid. We all want our jobs. We all want to, we all want our retirement plans. We all want our, paid vacations. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. We all want safety safety and security. Right. So the question I have here is, how are your needs for funding impacting your ethics and the needs of the addiction community? Because let's be honest, most of our programs, not all, but a lot of the programs that we work for, they're run by business people. They're not run by us. They're not run by counselors. They're not run by people that have, I don't know if anybody participated in the code of ethics thing before this, but the first 3 things on that code of ethics is making the system better and helping people. Business doesn't do that. Business supports the business. Business protects its own model. It protects its people, which is beautiful, and those people are actually helping people, so it doesn't not do anything, but the ethics are different in that way. So asking yourself, where is it, and then how can we look at alternatives to that funding? And like I said before, the government regulates the funding, but the government's also the one that charges the taxes, and then they're the ones that moderate the need for creating more jobs and creating more taxpayers. I mean, that's kind of their job to do it. So, not to tick too many people off, but that's like asking Colonel Sanders to babysit your chickens. The same guy who's funding you is screaming buck a beer. So let's, be a little careful when we're looking at this funding, and what are our alternatives to find that, right? Then we're looking at grants, and we're looking at how we struggle and fight over funding. I've seen times where, there's people trying to get a grant and trying to tackle funding that they don't really need, but another program could definitely use a lot more, like really use a lot more. And as leaders, they don't look at that. Leaders want to protect the program. I mean, their goal is to keep security within that building and within the people. And sometimes we have to lead the leaders, and we have to say, hey, that's not the right choice, and we need to look at how that funding might be able to go to a different program or go somewhere else that could use it more, even though it's not for us, because the community needs it more. And we need to put that in the top of our mind. How am I working myself out of a job? Turn your voice calmly outwards. So asking yourself, am I preaching to the choir? And in this sense, I participated in so many events and so many advocacy panels and so many public speaking things, and it was me talking to other people in the industry, like I'm doing right now, and it's beautiful, but this is in a different sense in the educational and getting your CEUs and stuff. But it tends to be that we spend a lot of time sitting around talking to other people in the industry about how we need to change the industry, and we're not having those conversations with the people outside of the industry, and having those conversations with, for example, my father. I spent 2 or 3 years having a conservative military brat, believes that everybody should do all their own work, and mental health is bull crap and blah blah blah. Right? This is the guy. After several years of just having calm conversations and looking at the rationale and just talking to him about mental health and the underlying undertones of it, he's now sitting in with his buddies in the coffee shop, all of these straight-laced guys, telling them the stuff about mental health and how they need to change their ways and they need to look at it a different way. And it's just those little conversations is what changes the world as far as I'm concerned. And I say calmly outwards because what I've noticed in a social media world, we want to yell at people from the other side of the computer. We want to knock people down and smack them around when they disagree with who we are. And it's not about having those enlightened conversations and showing that there's a passive and peaceful way of doing things, but we want to yell at people, and all we do is create cognitive dissonance, and we just reinforce those beliefs and put people in a mindset that's not going to help us in any way, shape, or form. So asking yourself how you're calmly turning your voice outward, and if anybody has lived experience or the understanding of anonymity, I would also like to kind of put that out there with within the 12-step process, or the idea of anonymity. Anonymity is really super important when it comes to keeping privacy amongst within the rooms of AA and keeping other people's confidentiality, as is confidentiality in the medical system and the Personal Health Information Act and all those wonderful things. But anonymity has become this completely linked with addiction, to the point where people think that if you have addiction, you have to keep it anonymous. And that just perpetuates shame. And it just says that there's something wrong with you. If it has to be a secret, it has to be a problem, right? And no other disease in the world does this. And we need to, have those conversations calmly outward. If you're in, those circles, that you're having it outward and having those conversations with people, not your own circle, not looking back and having people reaffirm and give you your confirmation bias, because that's what algorithms on social media do. It just shows you more and more and more and more and more and more and more of what you already believe, right? So that you get hooked on it. Step outside of that box. Step outside of that box and challenge your beliefs and work with other people. So this is what I said earlier when we looked at those numbers. I said I'll come back to this when we were looking at the percentages of people, and I asked, how are you focusing on the 80%? So if 20% is going to 80% of the people, there's 80% that only 20% is going to, or less. I think it's less, right? So when we look at those numbers and we look at how many people potentially are out there doing nothing about it, or not using funding, or not participating in programs, what are we doing to concentrate on these people? and because it's a huge impact that they have, not just from the fact of that they're probably sick or hurting and need help, right? I mean, that's just scratching the surface. But when we're talking about, when I sit down, I've done so many assessments over the years, and it's almost every one that says, yeah, my mom or dad was an alcoholic, right? They weren't the alcoholic living, on the streets. They weren't that. They were the person who had money. They were the person that had the job. So this 20% that we're helping, we need to really look at this. 20% is actually the children of the other 80% from the previous generation. If that makes sense. But as long as we're ignoring this 80%, then we're constantly perpetuating this family disease in this process. But since all of our funding and our focuses and all that money goes towards that small percentage of people that I pointed out earlier, the people that are in the programs, when we're not focusing on that 80%, we're not educating the masses, right? And when we look at the turning point or the tipping point, I think it's Simon Sinek, he talks about the tipping point of what's normal, right? And he says it takes you to get up over 20% of the population to believe that something is normal. And then these are early adopters, or people that believe it's important. And then after that, so when people went out and got the iPhone, 20% of them were early adopters once they got that. And then it kind of tipped over, and there's this turning point where people just start seeing it as mainstream, and that's just normal, right? So recycling back in the 90s, everybody thought it was crazy, and they're like, what are they going to do? And then once it hit this tipping point of everybody doing it, it just fell and became normal. It's this normal thing that we do. We don't even think about it now, and it's in all of the restaurants and all the stores. There's this tipping point that we need to get. In order to get to this tipping point, we need to change society's minds, and we need to have them look at it in a different way. Here's this 80% of people from the recovery community that are not being talked to, that are not being looked at, that are not being educated, that are not being brought on board with what it is that we're trying to do when we're looking at trying to change our views and our ideas on mental health and change the culture of addiction as a whole. And when we look at this, interpersonal trauma, stigma, family systems, these things are all perpetual, and they keep going. And I also believe that this is the secret to more funding and breaking down shame and stigma, because when we look at that 80% that's not using the funding, those are all people that work. These are all, I don't know, I've got independent clients that are millionaires. These aren't, we assume that these people are all, don't have money, or they don't have anything like that. I think that there's plenty of funding, and there's plenty of voices out there to be heard. And if we can get these people, and we can focus on these people and show them a different way and educate them and help them to have a voice, that they could actually help us turn this tipping point and show us where there's a lot more funding and a lot more ways to help people. That was my soapbox for today. I was waiting to say that one. Did you see how I didn't breathe twice? Yeah. So back to my analogy of the river and why, Dean, what are you talking about it for? So the analogy again on the bottom, the Desmond Tutu, there comes a point when we need to stop just pulling people to the river, and we need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. Well, we do that now. We've been doing that. We've been saying, why are they falling in, right? And we say, oh, it's trauma, or oh, it's this, or here it is. These are the reasons why they fall in the river. It's all of these different ideas of why they fall in the river. But what we don't ask is, why did they walk to the river in the first place? What got them there? How are we stopping them from getting to the river in the first place? Not why did they fall in, right? Or where did they fall in? But looking at it even further back. And we do it, but just not to the extent that I believe we could be. So here we go. We have some special information here. Looking at the theories of addiction. This is from Rick Cernick's Substance Use. I didn't use APA formatting on how I cited this, so hopefully I don't get in some crap for this one. But there's a method to my madness. So here's a list of the theories of addiction from Rick Cernick's book. Looking at all of these theories of addiction, every single one of them has a different treatment modality. Everyone has a different way of looking at it and a way to kind of fix things and looking at it depending on what the person believes, right? So we have biological, psychological, social, we have moral constructs, all these different reasons that would cause somebody to fall into this. I would like for you to take literally 2 seconds literally 2 seconds, to think about what makes all these the same. What's the same about all of these. And your 2 seconds is up because I'm going to carry on. What's the same about these, or what I see the same about these, is the prevention is the same. Whether we're going to go around and start testing their brains or having people test for genetics or whatever it might be, the prevention is always awareness. The prevention is always knowledge and coping and understanding and being able to know when to ask for help. It's the same thing in every single one of these modalities. Every single one of these theories has the same answer. So this is where the last question that I have is, how are you going to share your awesomeness with the future? How are you encouraging the education system to teach our young to cope, understand trauma, regulate emotions, and know that it's okay to seek help? We leave it up to the education professionals to do this. We leave it up to the government to do this. But we are the voices as the addiction counselors and as the people in the front lines and as the people that really understand that. We are the advocates. We're the ones that need to be pushing this and figuring out how to get our voices heard in the education system. They are starting to do it now. I had a discussion with a primary school teacher who wonderfully shared with me some of the things that they're doing, and they're doing about 40 minutes twice a week in elementary schools. They're talking about self-esteem and coping and emotions and looking at, which is wonderful, which is a great direction. But I still think there's so much more that we can do, and that we need to look at how we're going to change society as a whole. And this is the pinnacle of working myself out of a job, is how am I setting the future up so that there's no such thing as an addiction counselor in the future, that there's no such thing as a need for social workers in the future. It's a pipe dream, and it's high and loose, but the idea is we still have to do it. We still have to do it, because even if we can cut the numbers in half, right? Even if I can still make it so that the job is obsolete, maybe not completely gone, or whatever it is I can do to make sure that we're, creating a compassion-based society. So in the red here, I put it, the biggest question that I always get when I say that we need to increase the education system and learning these things is, the rebuttal is, but it's the parents' job, right? I got that same rebuttal from my father once, and I looked at him straight in the eye and I said, who taught you? And that shut him up real fast, because it was his father, the alcoholic, who was, in a World War II vet, right? So he didn't teach him anything other than how to sit down and shut up and mind his own business. So when we look at that, that idea of where it's lacking, I've been reading several books on inner child work and through psychology over the last couple of months, and every one of them says that the effectiveness of parenting, or the parenting, I'm trying to remember, it is successful parenting when it comes to emotional regulation and coping is about 5% right now, and 95% is ineffective. 95% of parents are not hitting the mark. So that's now a social problem. That is now a problem that we have to look at as a figuring out. I mean, now we realized that we had a 95% deficiency in algebra many years ago, so we added that to the curriculum. So I figure a 95% deficiency in emotional regulation and coping calls for crisis. That calls for saying, hey, something's got to change. So, asking the question, are we creating a society that's based on compassion? And are we incorporating that into our education system? And are we, as counselors, what are we doing to change tomorrow, to change the world, and to make things different? So on the bottom here, I say, so ask yourself every day, am I working myself out of a job? Maybe I was too quick. I was pretty fast there. Yeah, 50 minutes of my hour and a half. But I got my soapbox, and I appreciate it. So this little thing at the top here, this is a proverb that I hold dear to me, because I believe that this is where we sit in multiple generations and being able to help make the world a better place. And it says the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is now. So we can't sit and wait another 20 years to look back and say, why haven't we fixed this problem yet? We need to start doing something about it right away so that our children and our children's children are not looking at it. So thank you, everybody. Feel free to contact me. My contact information is on the bottom here. My website, I am on Facebook and Instagram under @DeanOfAddiction. And you can look me up and say hi and all that good stuff. And then I think I have some hands here. Rick.
Dean, since we have time, will you take some questions from us now and give some chat? I was looking at the chat group and people are having some really interesting conversations.
Sure. I would be happy to.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a question because you and I talk all the time too, but I was following the chat and there's some awesome conversations there. So this is your chance to quiz our TV host.
I'm scrolling through the chat here. It's a little difficult to, okay. John Marshall, whether we push back from the parents or how do we still follow through? I think that's the problem of the educator. I think we need to push the education system, not the parents, right? And to be honest, I think the parents follow suit on what the education system tells them they want to do. I mean, most of them just taught their kids from home for the last year. So I think that the education system follows through. The parents follow through with the education system. That's what I would think, right? Michael, to answer your question, I have a daughter that is an early childhood educator, and she's helping by educating the parents the effect they have on the kids when they're drinking, yelling, and doing drugs. That's amazing. Like where is that normally taught? Nowhere, right? We have no idea the impact of what, the substance use happens at home. Mike Hannon, I see your hand up.
Yeah. Excellent presentation, by the way, Dean. Yeah,
Thanks, Mike.
You present much better than you golf. Anyway,
it's true.
One of the things, as you know, I've been an advocate of and have talked about many, many times, and kind of did a little thing in the chat here about it too. I believe the solution to this, if you want to call it a solution, is about connection. And you understand where I work and what we do and what our philosophy is and how we teach people how to connect. And one of the things of why I think people early on get into addiction is because it's the easiest group to connect with. They're the people that demand the least from you to make you a part of their group, right?
Yep.
All you basically have to do is show up, and if occasionally you supply, that works even better. But there's not a lot of stress or pressure to be part of that group. And I think social media in and of itself, the way it's structured these days, is probably one of the most disconnecting things we have. As we're supposed to be able to communicate with each other more, we've lost the art of communication because it's either through reading, texting, or whatever situation. I also believe that when we come out of this lockdown scenario, we're going to find more mental health and substance issues than we can even imagine, as an impact of the fact that people at a time in their life when they're trying to develop social skills are absolutely totally shut down from other people and the ability to connect. Mm-hmm. And if they're in environments that are problematic, maybe substance abuse, maybe violence, family violence, whatever, once again, disconnection from the environment they're in. They withdraw within. Next thing you know, what helps that? What medicates pain? Substance. Like all addiction is a pain management issue. And it's just, they find whatever medicine per se works best for their particular type of pain. And, and so it's teaching connection. And it's kind of hard to teach connection when you can't even interact with other people at this point. But I think, I know there was a guy on YouTube who said we have to rethink the way we look at it, the entire thing, because now if you have somebody with a substance abuse issue, what do? We put them in prison, which is probably the most disconnecting population you can be a part of. And then if we don't do that, we do something else, and we start to segment them and move them away from things that are actually going to help them find connection in a healthy manner, in a meaningful manner, so that they change their belief system about themselves as to one that says, you know what, I'm not going to do this to me anymore because I'm worth more than this. But
Right.
now I'm off my soapbox too. Thanks.
All right.
Good to see,
Thanks,
good to
Mike.
see you, buddy.
Nice to see you too. And you're also a better speaker than a golfer.
It doesn't take much, about 4 words.
I agree with you, Mike. And when I look at the curriculum that they're starting to implement in, like, I actually got a curriculum list from a public school teacher. I wasn't going to share it because I didn't have permission to do so. But the stuff that they're talking about is top of the list is self-awareness and that idea of knowing when you're feeling disconnected so that you can ask for help. So that's, you can't really teach connection, but you sure can teach how to ask for it or when to recognize when you're not feeling right. So that's going in that way. Liz?
Sorry, it took me a sec to unmute there. I'll just sort of say a little bit of my context. Although I worked for many years in adult treatment, in the past few years, I've been working in prevention and part of a program in Ottawa where we go to schools in Ottawa, mostly at the intermediate level, and recruit students to participate in groups that we then do on a weekly basis for 1 to 2 years, depending on what the school's willing to support. So it's a real opportunity to provide the students with some pretty significant connection and to get them to learn a whole lot of skills, communication skills and relationship development skills and emotional regulation skills and meditation and on and on. Like we aim for between 30 and 50 sessions with each student group. And, like I really see the value in this, but, one of the things that also really stands out to me is that in terms of the relationships with educators, educators do a fantastic job in many respects, but without specific training around addiction issues, I think they, like pretty much everybody else in the population, brings their own biases about stigma into the conversation. And, that's something, well, stigma of addiction, but also stigma of mental health issues, both in terms of what the students are suffering and in terms of what might be happening in the families. And I think that as much as, wouldn't it be awesome if educators could take on a more substantial role in this way, steps also have to be taken to provide them with some of this kind of anti-stigma training and with the skills. Like, our model is one of our staff paired with a consistent person from the school. And yes, that individual person over time, I think, develops a lot of skills in terms of being able to support the students that way. But unfortunately, there's like 3 of us for the whole city of Ottawa. Like, it just feels like such a tiny drop in a ginormous bucket, right?
Right, absolutely. That's amazing what you're doing. That is fantastic. I wish there was more of that everywhere else. What I'm hearing though is teaching the teachers, right?
Well,
and
yeah,
at how to.
the program was initially set up as a train the trainer model, but that part fell apart because without the active weekly support, it just fizzled. Like the teachers didn't have the skills to maintain the groups. So the other thing that we really find as well is our relationships with the individual schools sometimes peter out, because if there's a change of leadership in the administration and they get a little bit of pushback from some of the teachers who feel that our group is a waste of time and that the students need to be in class, it can fizzle out depending on how supportive the individual administrators are.
Right. I always think of it as if you're emotionally regulated and calm and cool and controlled, then you're learning better anyways. Like, I mean, let's look at the, putting the horse in front of the cart. I mean, if I'm anxious and upset and bothered, I'm not learning anything anyways. So we should probably teach those skills first so that you can learn effectively and properly. And this is, this is where I'm on my soapbox talking about not just stepping up. I mean, it's wonderful to step up and say, hey, we're going to help and teach these things, but you're talking about administrative changes and here 1 week, gone the next. It's asking, how do we change the whole system? Like, how do we get it in so that, teachers are trauma informed out of teachers college? Right? I mean, this is just a normal thing. Like, this is what you get and this is what it is. And these are the basics. You need to understand that you're in a field that, is focused on human behavior. That's all there is to it. And part of human behavior is trauma and addiction and substance use and mental health, right? So I agree with you. Wouldn't that be wonderful? But that's why I'm here kind of poking the bear to say, how do we keep asking these questions and keep making these changes? Thanks, Liz. Stephanie Howard, the slides are not available, but I can make them available. I can see if we can upload them onto the Wova? I just still don't even know. I'm just going to keep Wovaing. Wova. David.
Sorry, it took me a second to find the unmute key there. Yeah, great presentation. Thanks for delivering that today. And I can really agree with a lot of the things you're saying about, a lot of times I feel like I'm witnessing a lot of the layering of the cables that you talked about, right? And the fact that you're able at one point to walk across the street and say, hey, we need to do something here, I think is fantastic. But speaking for myself, my job description is like, 5 to 6 clients a day, then you have time for documentation and that's it. So I think that sometimes it's challenging in that role to be seeing these things, right, that are going on, but not having, I guess, the position, right, or the voice maybe as the worker, right, to be heard, especially with different people who run organizations and
Right.
boards and things like that.
Right.
But something that occurred to me as you were speaking about that 80% is, what are your thoughts on using more, especially now during COVID, the like virtual models to reach people where they can do things maybe a little bit more self-directed and check in less often? Like, it's less resource intensive maybe, but it still
Absolutely.
kind of grabs people. And would that be a way, in your kind of mindset to bridge some of that?
Yeah, I'm 3 steps ahead of you on there, and I've been looking at those formats and the online programs and looking at what's available and trying to even do some of my own stuff privately, to do some webinars and groups and facilitate things behind the scenes that can be done digitally, because people want that privacy, they want that anonymity, they want that security. Because at 80%, most of them are the people that don't want their boss to know, that don't want, these are the the CEOs and the people that are keeping their cocaine addiction secret kind of stuff, but they still need the help just as much, right? So I mean, absolutely, you're right. When you're talking about doing your 5 sessions a day and then notes, that's the really difficult part. That's the sacrifice part. That's the hard part, and that's what makes it so uneasy. That's the analogy I used about the stock room in the pet store, right? I mean, you're going to have to take a day and take that time out. That sucks and it's uncomfortable, and everybody's got to go in the stock room and clean that crap out. And it's figuring out how to do it, and it's not always the nicest feeling in the world, but it's knowing that when you come out the other side, you're going to be that much more efficient. Makes it so that you need to stand up and say, hey, we need to make this change because we're going to be more efficient on the other side. We're going to save money. It'll save us money and save us time if we just take a step back and do this first, right? But most leaders and most people want to look at, how are we just going to get through the day? Let's just get through the day. Let's just get through the day, right? And we've got to figure out the discomfort to make it so that we can have a better next week, right? It might have a shitty week this week, right? But maybe we'll have 4 more good weeks because of the shitty week, right? Thanks. It's nice to see you, David.
Yeah, likewise, Dean. Thanks.
Jim Watkin. Jim, there's a message here that I'm reading of you. It says, until stigma and substance use is challenged, then anonymity will be a necessity for many. I 100% agree. I 100% agree. There's some people that it's just not safe, but it was still trying to encourage those that feel it is safe to be able to talk and say out loud. But that's the chicken or the egg scenario, right? Until some people come out and start talking about it, then it's always going to have stigma, and then no one will want to talk about it because it has stigma, and then no one will want to talk about it because there's stigma, and it just kind of goes and goes and goes. So there's that, trying to figure out that tipping point of making it normal. You have your hand up too, Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. Appreciate what you said so far, and Mike as well. You mentioned the importance of connection, and connection is definitely an important piece of this. But what I would suggest is when we're coming from a Eurocentric perspective of the individual and taking care of themselves and building it up throughout your whole lifetime, connection becomes a very, very limited piece of yourself and your recognition of things. What I've noticed since I was in London, Ontario for many years and worked the front lines in doing street outreach for about 15 years in London. And then I moved up to Cambridge Bay, Nunavut, and I'm working with the Inuit population. I'm teaching social work and social service work in the college here. And what I've recognized is the fact that connection within our populations here and through the Inuit population is extremely important. However, the reflection of Eurocentric thought and Western civilization, if you call it that, is such that the connection was destroyed through colonization and through residential school experiences, through 60 scoops, through dog slaughter, various things like that that have occurred directly in what's known as Nunavut now, but through the Inuit populations. So my situation, which I recognized very quickly when I got up here, was how people seem so disassociated from each other and the community because of the loss of language, the loss of culture, and all those types of things. And those are the types of things that I recognized from the individuals I worked with on the street, that the same type of thing. And the fact that they didn't know who they were because they were brought up in a position where you need to take care of yourself, and by pulling up your bootstraps, you're going to be successful. And those are some of the things we need to look at. And when stigma is a big part of that, because if you're not able to react in that way, then you're looked as not being strong enough or capable of or morally able to take care of those types of things. So that all starts to become a full circle.
Sure.
And working with that. And the other piece is just the whole legalization of substances. And if you're going to legalize, that's fine. But if you legalize without affecting the stigma around the use of substances or anything like that, then it's going to be all for naught. So
Right.
that Portuguese experiment, the Switzerland experiments, those are the situations that occurred where the doctors were mandated to change their views. They were mandated to help and assist people and do those types of things. And the police were mandated that as well. So not only did they decriminalize and put things in place in a different manner, they also systemically made sure changes were being made in order for that to happen.
Of course.
Some of these types of things that we need to look at as an overall type of situation. The other thing that I think is really important, I put that in comments too, is fear-based education, especially around addiction, is a primary motivation to work with people. And it never works. It has never worked. It never is going to work. And when I was working with individuals on the street, then it was about supporting them and recognizing, letting them know, yeah, you know who you are. So let's figure out where you're going from there around that without putting the fear into it, but also teaching them around prevention and teach them around the education of truth around substances. The reason they continue to use substances is because they bloody work. They do exactly what they're expected of. Yep. And so they're not going to stop that unless it becomes so problematic in different aspects of their life that it something needs to change around that. So it's about identifying the value that they have on it, as well as all these other factors that are playing in. Sorry if I went too long.
No, that's okay. No, I agree with all that you're saying there, and then even the connection piece. I can't be like, hey, come here, be connected, damn it! I want to come here, let me connect you, be connected, right? That's not going to happen. And the things that have happened in society and oppression and colonization and all of those things are not going to go anywhere. That's why we're talking about, this. The premise of my presentation is working myself at a job, meaning that we're looking at next generations, we're looking at future, we're looking at how do we change those ideas and cultures. I understand that stigma is a problem and it will never get any better until we deal with that. But the only way we're going to do that is we know right now, jumping up and down and smashing our face against a wall, we're not changing the system that we're in right now. And the only way to do that is to bring up a new system and to raise a new system and to understand that, the next generations and the generations after. So I'm asking, how do we focus on those to make sure, so that the children of your clients now are not going back into that same ideas or those same things, or learning how to understand how to ask for connection or understand that that's what you need. And not have a fear-based education system, and have a compassionate-based education system that's based on the understanding that people have mental health issues and that people have the inability to cope, and it's okay, right?
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize, you talked about trees, that plant the tree 20 years ago, plant the tree now. Well, the trees have been planted every 10 years, but you have somebody going in and chopping them off right after. And that's the difficulty. Whatever work you're doing, you plant those trees. But I did an awful lot of work in 2000, 2005 in London, but those cheap trees have all been chopped down. There's absolutely nothing there around it any longer. So those are the types of things that happen when somebody else has a different perception of how funding should be or what their role should be, and that competition piece, then those trees get chopped down and they can never flourish.
So that comes to my analogy of the wires, Jim, and everybody coming in and laying their own groundwork and having their own chaotic and crazy things, and we need to figure out how to step back and make it one thing run smoothly, and then the next person that walks in says there's only one wire here and that's the one we're using, so we better figure out how to make this work, opposed to going in and laying their own wire again and asking, how do we get back to those basics and keep things. I know it's not that simple, and it's an oversimplification that I'm talking about, but I also believe that those changes are going to come from the people in the field, from us making those advocacies, from us making the changes to the programs, from us going to the teachers' colleges, from us going to lobbying the governments to make those changes become more permanent, and that those trees that we do plant are still there in 20 years.
Yep.
Right? Mike Hannon?
Yeah. I agree absolutely with Jim, and if anything, the Aboriginal community shows us what disconnection can do in resulting in substance abuse across the nation. I think the other aspect when I talk about connection is what it does is it takes the focus off the substance, which is I think where a lot of stigma is implied, right? Like, okay, well, this guy just drinks, well, this guy uses meth, well, this guy's a fentanyl user, and the focus is on the substance, which brings its own level of stigma into the situation. And I think if we look at addiction from a perspective of connection, it brings humanity back into it, and it focuses on what the problem is the person, right? The problem is not the substance. The substance is the substance. It's going to be this, it's going to be that, it's going to be whatever works is what it's going to be. And I think it's more important that if we look at and address this from a perspective of a community understanding of people's needs to be a part of something, it makes a big difference in what that stigma is going to look like going forward, because people aren't going to be identifying people by a substance, right? Well, that guy's a crackhead. Well, that guy's a drunk. Well, that guy's a this. It's going to be, here's a person who must be hurting more than most because of the intensity of the substance he's using to medicate the situation. And so if we can look at it from that perspective, like I said, it brings the humanity back into it, and that's what we want to be about, is the humanity of people, and start teaching it to kids, right? Sadly, there's so many different things in today's world where everything's being factionalized. You belong in this box, you belong in that box, you belong in that box. which has nothing to do with substances necessarily. You know, like everybody identifies as certain different things that are all fractionalizing each other. Why don't we just identify as human beings? And as such, on this spinning little ball, we need to do some stuff so that we don't lose as many as we do to the medication that they're using that is ultimately killing them. And they can just rely on each other rather than the medicine. And I want to finish it with this because she doesn't seem to know how to use her messaging. Hi, Rita, how are you? She's got her camera off now, but I hope she's there. I want to say hi to hi, Rita. Hey, sweetie. Good to see you, love. Anyway, thanks so much, Dean.
Thanks, Mike. There's some more questions in the chat there, but I've lost track of them, and they've all kind of molded together. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer or talk about or comments even.
Bueller. Hey, Dean.
Sean?
Hey, yeah, great presentation. I wouldn't expect anything less. But my question for you is put in the chat box. Something that you didn't want to talk about is your pursuit with being more on the screen. So I'm wondering when season 2 is going to be dropped.
The producers are in the works talking about what season 2 looks like. They're hoping, because if anybody's watched it, the first one was what looks very similar to this. It's Dean's house on Zoom. Like, hey, we're on a TV show, right? They're hoping to actually have access to the studio and actually have like a television studio set up in the fancy cameras and all that good stuff. So they're kind of waiting out to see what that looks like and hopefully get back soon. But the season 1, they've dedicated to play in reruns on Rogers TV right through till the fall. So that will be on there. I think almost every day there's playing an episode, pretty close to anyways. So, and for those of you who don't know, Sean Rumble was one of the guests on the television show. And so was Mike Hannon and Rick, wherever Rick's at. Okay. Anything else? Anyone else? Good.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dean. It's Jen McAndrew again. The session's been recorded, so we'll ensure that everyone can get a link to it. And if they have questions, we'll be sure to connect them appropriately. And thank you again for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you in other sessions.
Thank you very much. Thank everybody. Thank you for participation and great questions and feedback. And look forward to seeing everyone soon enough.